Coming up next on The Voice of Alabama Politics, Draft Ainsworth. Also, the V-Team takes a look at a cover-up at the Department of Corrections. And the war over a gas tax begins. Are they really going to dress like that? Like paint their faces, wear kilts and everything? Wow, I hope so. What a lovely war. All this and much, much more coming up next on The V. Welcome to The Voice of Alabama Politics, where we tackle the tough issues so you have the hard facts. I'm your host, Bill Britt, and as always, I'm joined by the V-Team.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hi.
Hello.
Jonathan, good to have you out from behind the cameras and the studio and all that.
Well, you know, it's good to be seen every once in a while, and I shaved. And
Yeah, you did.
You did clean up pretty good.
Good.
Your mother'd be proud.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Jonathan, we've talked about this issue a number of times. Nationally, the popularity of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, is at an all-time high. There are major pushes here in Alabama, especially from the Alabama Hospital Association, to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. However, the legislature still seems resistant, saying in a recent article that the voters didn't care about expanding Medicaid. They made their voices clear they weren't interested in it. But Kay Ivey has said expanding Medicaid may be preferable. I don't know what happens next, but it is still a big issue.
You know, and it was a question we raised in our meeting. I can't understand why we don't want to bring Medicaid in, you know, and they've used the budget as an excuse. My personal opinion is that Medicaid had to be the bad guy in the last election. So they chose that to make the bad guy, just like they've chosen Obama in last year's to make, I've chosen him to be the bad guy. I mean, that's politics. You know, there are children and people who need Medicaid. You know, my sister has disabilities and she's on Medicaid. You know, we have children all over this state who need Medicaid, and we need to keep this funded. And when the federal government comes in and says, look, we're gonna fund 90%, all you gotta find is 10%. Surely we can find that somewhere. We mismanage funds all the time in this state.
Yeah, well, Susan, I mean, some 300,000 Alabamians fall through the cracks. Mm-hmm. That's 300,000 Alabamians that might qualify for expanded Medicaid, but it will also bring in hundreds of millions of dollars and jobs.
It will. I think it's 11,000 jobs they're anticipating at least. And people need to understand, for every dollar we invest in Medicaid for the state, we get 2.67 back. So that's the federal government sending money back into the state of Alabama. It'll help keep doctors here that are leaving to other states, keep rural hospitals open so people don't have to drive 100 miles after having a heart attack to get to a hospital. I mean, this is some pretty important stuff.
Well, I think Daniel Patrick Moynihan, I think, said that you can judge the character of a nation by the way it treats its elderly, its young, and its poor. And I think sometimes if Alabama would look in the mirror, it's failing in its character. And I think this comes down to being a character issue.
It does, and I really feel like it would not only, you know, influx of, you know, economy, jobs, healthcare, it would just be a boost in societal morale. I feel like just knowing that, you know, people's health concerns were finally met, just because I feel like on our part we've been so failing in the past.
Well, and another point here is that, all right, if you have a child that has a flu that needs to see a doctor and can't see a doctor because they don't have health insurance, and then that child goes to school, then it affects all of those that are insured. I mean, this is a circular thing any way you look at it.
And it does hike up the insurance rates for all of us who buy insurance, because we have to pay for the folks that are going to the emergency room and not paying their bills.
And that was another point I made. You know, Blue Cross, I mean, this can only help, you know, with insurance, you know, because Blue Cross and AARP have subsidies for Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. And this would only help if we had enough Medicare help in our state. I would think it would help our insurance rates stabilize.
Yep.
And I think you made a great point about the rural hospitals. You know, if you might not know anyone on Medicare, Medicaid, but you know someone that lives in a rural town. If they have a heart attack and it's 90 minutes to get to a hospital, they're probably not going to make it.
Yeah. Well, we want to switch over to another subject here. There is, Susan, what looks to me as a cover-up at the Alabama Department of Corrections. Grant Culliver, who was associate coordinator over the federal, the state prisons, has been forced into retirement after allegations of misconduct were filed against him. There was an investigation by the Attorney General's office. They referred it to the Ethics Commission. Now he's being allowed to retire, but we don't know what he did, and he's a public servant, a public official. We pay a salary. Right. How come we can't know?
They're trying to pull it under some sort of grand jury secrecy thing, which it really doesn't qualify for, and say that, you know, this is basically sealed and whatever. But having been a taxpayer that paid his salary, I want to know what kind of malfeasance. I want to know that his next employer, especially if it's the state, knows what his malfeasance was. I just think we have a right to know here.
Jonathan, we're seeing ethics in this state slip away one tiny bit at a time, and sometimes like a big boulder coming out of the wall. But down in Sumter County, the sheriff down there, Sheriff Clark, pled guilty to at least over half a dozen felonies. And the district attorney down there said, oh, well, I don't want him to go to prison. The guy was having drugs sold out of the county jail.
Yeah. It's not like this guy had some campaign finance reports violations or, you know, even got a check he wasn't supposed to get. I mean, this guy was running drugs out of his jail. What we hear, prostitution out of his jail. That's a disgrace to the badge. It's a disgrace to law enforcement. And you know, I hate to say that, but he should serve some time.
He was letting prisoners, he was giving prisoners keys to get out of jail.
The key,
he had a contraband room set up so one of his prisoners could run his drug business.
The key to both of these are, who are they set up to testify against? And that's the question. Who are they set up to testify, and why are they keeping these charges secret? And I think that he's testifying against somebody.
Well, I don't know, but right now it looks pretty egregious to me. I mean, it's just kind of crazy.
I just think it's crazy we have these two huge scandals. I mean, I would consider them huge. I guess nobody else says, since we're the only people reporting on them. But I feel like somebody should be looking at these and doing something about it. But
now, the AG's office has an opportunity to reach down and pull up these kind of cases.
Absolutely. They can take over these cases and prosecute them and demand that, you know, Mr. Clark go to jail and prosecute if there's any wrongdoing. Obviously, there's something went wrong over there at the prisons. They can do that. As a matter of fact, Governor Kay Ivey, as the chief magistrate, can do likewise.
Well, maybe we need to call them out and say, you know, we need to get something done here. We need to get something. We need to see what this is. We need to address these felonies. I mean, seriously?
Well, expecting Steve Marshall to do anything about ethics violations is like expecting the heavens to open and hallelujah, I've seen the light. Anyway, well, this week, Derek Trotter, great guy, took over as chief of staff for Senator Dale Marsh. We wish him all the luck in the world.
Yeah, and he had been with Marsh earlier as communications director.
Yes.
And we were wishing him luck.
No, we do. All right, we're going to leave it right there. You're watching The V, the voice of Alabama politics. We'll be right back with more news and opinion.
You'll never guess what 400,000 people in the U.S. were using when they crashed their cars last year. No, not this. This. Distracted driving will kill you. Drive safe, Alabama. A message from your Alabama Department of Transportation.
The Energy Institute of Alabama promotes reliable, affordable, and clean energy to help grow our economy, create high-paying jobs, and build public support for Alabama's energy industry. access to clean, affordable energy continues to be an issue of vital importance in the halls of government and around the kitchen tables across our nation. The Energy Institute of Alabama is the best source of energy industry information and how it affects households across the state, from convenient energy production to alternative fuels to solar power and beyond.
$20. It won't buy much in the way of Christmas cheer. Yet it means plenty of hope for the homeless. Your $20 feeds 10 at the Jimmy Hale Mission. The more you give, the more we feed. Help us nurture those with nothing else and show them the true spirit of the season. To give, please call 323-5878 or visit jimmyhalemission.com today.
2/3 of drivers who died in car crashes chose to ignore this warning. Seatbelts save lives. Drive safe, Alabama. A message from your Alabama Department of Transportation.
Welcome back to the voice of Alabama politics. Susan, Attorney General Steve Marshall had a staff meeting last week in which he now feels that he has identified the Antichrist.
Yeah, it's you.
It's me.
It's you and Josh Moon, apparently.
You can have two Antichrists.
Well, it's split personality, I would suppose.
It looks like to me, New Bentley, that's as close to the Antichrist as he can come, I thought. But now it turns out that, and he said that Josh and I are the Antichrist.
I wish we could have gotten Josh's comments on this.
Oh,
me too.
yeah,
So
really.
Josh was so excited to be the Antichrist.
And you're going to ruin his name and run him out of town.
Well, at least
you
one
got
of
that
those
part
things.
right.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, move on from that little wimp. All right, well, one of the things that has come up, and again, I hate to go back to prisons. This may be all fine, Jonathan. It may be nothing wrong with it at all. But the Alabama Department of Corrections has just added on to contracts that are almost $14 million to kind of look at designing a prison, maybe. And what it is one architectural firm, Goodwin Mills and Kaywood, they're getting almost $2 million to do design. Also, CC and Litchfield is getting some undisclosed amount of money on design. And then Hoare Construction or Hoare Management is getting nearly $12 million to manage a project, but we don't have any prison plans.
This is utterly ridiculous, and I'll say it, Claire, egregious.
Yeah.
And let me tell you why. Our state has never been a good steward of the money, and I'll say this. We don't use the resources that we have. For this $1.9 million, $2 million to hire an architecture firm, no offense, I'm a capitalist, I'm a Republican, but we could hire 4 architects that for a 2-year contract that they work for the state, get benefits. They each have a couple of assistants. We could put a whole team of 10 people together for probably $700,000 to $800,000, and we've saved $1.2 million. And we need to run this state like a business. And it's the same thing with the construction company. We have contractors. We've got engineers. They can simply go to the office down the street and work with the state architects, and we could do this ourselves.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. We're funneling millions of dollars to these companies to brainstorm and come up with an idea.
Yeah, come up with an RFP.
It just seems like we should be saving these funds, which I may add is major money to Alabama because we're kind of dwindling here, and save that for when we actually have a plan set out.
Or as you brought up in the meeting, there's some of your Medicaid money right there.
Some of your Medicaid money
Well,
right there.
It's insane.
But I mean, the truth is, Robert Bentley, that fool, spent several $1 million on a plan and on these other things. I mean, come on now.
But we don't have a product out of that.
No.
That's what I'm saying. What came from that?
It.
Nothing.
Well, there's no
There
telling
was not
we're
even
going
an
to get.
RFP. There's not a site selection. There's nothing that came out of that money already.
It's just the most insane stuff we see time and again. 10 million here, 10 million there, and nothing to show for it.
Nothing to show for it. It's the way that the state does business. I had an old-time politician who's a dear friend of mine who I look up to, but he's old school, and he said, you know, Jonathan, or you know, Barbie, everybody in this state's got to wet their beak a little bit. And that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's wetting the beak. Wetting the beak.
I think somebody needs to punch him in the beak.
And I think the key word in that whore construction is in their name.
Yeah. Whoa, hey. Who's in charge of HR this week,
I think
Charles?
Josh is.
Anyway, I want to move on. You know, Susan, over the weekend, last week and last weekend and into the week, we got calls from people after we did the segment that we needed a young person to run for U.S. Senate. Mm-hmm. And to a person, they said, what's wrong with Will Ainsworth running? Yeah, he just won a campaign for lieutenant governor, but he's a young man. He's under 40, under 40 years old. He is a heck of a campaigner. He's a very wealthy businessman. And they kept going, we need a draft Will Ainsworth to run for the U.S. Senate. He would beat Doug Jones like a rented mule.
Absolutely, and you got to understand, we had two senators with seniority up there. We had Sessions, who went up to be Attorney General, of course now is not Attorney General anymore, and we've got Shelby. It takes about 20 years to get seniority up there. He's the perfect age. By the time he would get his seniority in his 50s, where if you've got somebody running in their 60s, they would vest in their 80s. Let's be realistic here. Do we want to actually have some seniority up there to bring the stuff home to Alabama or not?
Well, you can't bring home.
He would be a great choice.
Yeah, you can't bring home the bacon, Jonathan, unless you've been there at least 2 terms.
That's right. You really can't.
That's 12 years.
To get the seniority, you have to be there for a while. And this is a great point. You know, it's time that we put young people in office. And when I say young, you know, mid-30s, early 40s, because they have time to get in there. We know technology. You know, myself, we know technology. We know how things are run. You look at you put people on your staff who have what we call the gray hair to help you with things that you don't know how to work. It's called building a good team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the thing is we really, I say it all the time, the baby boomers have done a pretty good job of messing things up. It's okay if we step aside and let somebody else mess it up. But the truth is, the group that said you can't trust anybody over 30 now says you can't trust anybody under 65.
Exactly.
And that's ridiculous. We've got some great talent in this state. I want to move on to a very important subject, not that that one wasn't, but Saturday before last, we celebrated Rosa Parks Day, Susan. Long overdue that we honor this great icon of the civil rights movement who refused to give up on her seat on a Montgomery bus and really changed history.
And one of the things in Brandon Mosley's reporting that I found most interesting was she says, everybody says that I was tired and wouldn't move. I wasn't tired. I was just tired of being run over. And I thought that was so eloquent. And then, of course, the reaction to all of the protesting that went on with the bus systems went on for a year. Yeah. And it finally made a big difference in the civil rights movement.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, we are still grossly divided in our state, no more so than on Sunday morning when we go to worship in our churches. But if we can look at this and without hostility and look at it as a piece of history that changed us for the better, I think that helps us all be better people.
I agree with that. You know, people should take an example from Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and their peaceful protests and the things that they did, like sitting on the bus and refusing to get up. She wasn't hurting anyone. She was making a point to something without ensuing violence. Yep. And she was doing it in a peaceful, loving manner to make a point. And I think it's long overdue that we have a day for her.
And I think that Dexter Avenue needs a statue.
Absolutely.
Of Rosa Parks that commemorates that. But we have to leave it right there. You're watching The V, the voice of Alabama politics. We'll be right back with more news and opinions.
You'll never guess what 400,000 people in the U.S. were using when they crashed their cars last year. No, not this. This. Distracted driving will kill you. Drive safe, Alabama. A message from your Alabama Department of Transportation. 2/3 of drivers who died in car crashes chose to ignore this warning. Seatbelts save lives. Drive safe, Alabama. A message from your Alabama Department of Transportation.
Welcome back to The V, the voice of Alabama politics. Jonathan, there is no doubt that our infrastructure is crumbling, that to continue economic growth in the state, we're going to need our roads and bridges, our ports, our internet, our infrastructure to be ready and able to support growth. Right now, it is not. The suggestion on how we fix the infrastructure is to raise a gas tax. There are a couple of plans out there. One raises it 18 cents on the gallon, and then it's indexed to an index that we don't know about. Another one says that it's going to raise it 10 cents on the gallon and then periodically raise it another 10 cents. But this one has some slippery slopes in it. But there's a lot of plans circulating out there. But what we're hearing from public studies is that it would take up to 32 cents to at least tackle the infrastructure problems we got now. There's got to be a third way.
Well, I think the third way is I'll go back to being good stewards of the money. You know, spending $14 million to come up with a brainstorm for a new prison plan is utterly ridiculous. And this is the kind of stuff that we do in this state. And the gas tax, these guys here in Montgomery are legislators, and believe me, we have fine men who are legislators.
And women.
Some of them, and women, men and women who are legislators. And some of them have their own businesses and they understand this, but the rest of them get a check from us, the taxpayers, to pay their gas when they come back and forth to Montgomery and travel around the state. I'm a business owner. This affects business in our state. If you have a 20-cent gas tax, that's going to affect prices all over the state.
But Susan, we haven't raised the gas tax since Boy George wondered if you really wanted to hurt him. He hurt me, you know, and the thing is, we're going to have to do something about the infrastructure.
Well, and now working families are also going to be really affected by this, but you have to understand, too, that our roads and bridges are crumbling. You know, we've got to be able to do something to repair these and be able to, you know, get the broadband the way we need it and get all this taken care of. And it's 32 cents a gallon is not realistic. 18, maybe not. I don't know. There's going to have to be something in there somewhere.
Well, Charlie, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, I mean, I'm all for, you know, pitching in, you know, when the state needs it, you know, if there's, you know, raising taxes or whatever. But I think what it really comes back to, or at least to me, is what Jonathan said, is just misuse of funds. The money that we do have could be used for so many more important things than, like you said, a brainstorming session. So I think it's just crazy that we allow just money to be thrown around.
Also, we were bringing up about the 80s. The thing that is also important here is that you think about cars in the 80s and you think about cars now, much more fuel efficient.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. You know, it's a declining fund.
It is, and that's the thing. Josh Moon wrote an analysis of this. We looked at several plans for raising the gas tax, but one of the most outstanding ones that I saw was that the plan basically said, okay, well, we're going to do a modest gas tax raise, but what we're going to do is we're going to create a legislative commission that's going to oversee the Department of Transportation. They're going to take it away from the governor and give the Department of Transportation to the legislature. Jonathan, where are those hundreds of millions and billions going after that?
That's exactly right. And who are you going to blame? Some commissioners appointed by representatives. And if the legislature or the commissioners don't like the governor, then for 4 years they don't do anything on roads and bridges, and that governor will lose an election. It gives them too much power.
It's just too slippery. It's just too slick.
Yeah.
It's just slick. That's all it is.
No, Kay Ivy's not going to fall for that.
No.
That's some more of that wet your beak kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's wet your something.
Multiple beaks.
But it's just awful. I mean, they thought they could slide. It was a 120-page bill. I mean, it's like a little line or two in there.
Well, that's the way they always do it.
Yeah, I know.
They give you a book and put, like, I don't know, 23 words in it.
You know, one of the things we're going to have to face is that we need more revenue. Now, we need more revenue, and we've got to generate it. They don't want to raise property taxes. They don't want to do anything about income taxes. They already tax our groceries. So we're going to have other forms. I want to move on here where we talk about PCI, the Porch Creek Band of Indians. You know, they have a $1 billion gaming monopoly. They pay not one thin dime in taxes. And people can say what kind of good neighbors they are, but if my neighbors are living in $1 million home and every once in a while they throw me a bone across the yard, they ain't good neighbors. They're not, and they don't pay any taxes in the property taxes in my community. They aren't good neighbors. They are bad neighbors who are taking advantage of the system. Susan, what they are doing in Atmore and Wetumpka, according to IGRA, is illegal.
Yes, it is. It's absolutely illegal. The IGRA, the Indian regulations say, and this is federal, this is not state, that Indian gaming cannot exist in a state where it is not legal for everybody else to have gaming. Okay, so if the machines at Victoryland and at Green Track and all of them aren't legal according to the state, then those same machines are being played in Atmore and Wetumpka. And so they're not legal either.
Jonathan, U.S. Attorney George Beck, before he left office, asked the same thing. How in the world can one be legal and the other not be? He never got an answer.
Well, I think what George was seeing is the fact that how they were picking on the people in these counties, you know, and they were picking on Milton, you know, quite a bit. You know, they were picking on the counties where people voted for, you know, bingo and these type machines to be legal, and they weren't doing anything to the Indians.
Yeah, and the excuse is they can't do anything on tribal land. But we're not even sure that's tribal land.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get a fix for that to be tribal land. And Susan, Senator Shelby, Governor Ivey, they have said they are not going to help Porch Creek Indians because they don't want them to own the state, which is what they want to do.
Right. I think, you know, one of the things that's been suggested, and I think it would be fair, is if we're going to settle this whole issue, let's go ahead and get the lottery working and, in addition, sign a compact with the Indians so that they are indeed paying some taxes. They've offered to pay the state before. Let's just get it in writing.
But we got to have more than some kind of silly paper lottery that doesn't do anything.
Exactly.
We need a gaming plan. We need to pass gaming legislation.
I think there are 4 bills out there right now that are floating around.
Senator Marsh had the perfect one back in 2015, and Mike Hubbard killed it because he was in bed with the Porch Creek Indian. Same thing still going on.
Yep.
Well, we're going to have to leave it right there. This past week, Giles Perkins, political operative, once the head of the Alabama Democratic Party and the strategist for Doug Jones' victory on Senate, passed away. He was 51. You've been watching The V, the voice of Alabama politics. You watch us, because we watch them.